Every morning in medieval Europe, before the sun had fully risen, the first thing a peasant poured was ale.
Not wine, not water. Ale. Thin, lightly fermented, and weak enough for children to drink alongside their parents.
The rivers were polluted. The wells were shared with animals. Ale was simply the safer choice. Entire medieval villages, from the youngest toddler to the oldest farmer, drank it from morning until night.
That single fact tells you everything about what life tasted like 1,000 years ago.
Medieval food was not just about hunger or survival. It was shaped by class, religion, season, and geography in ways that most people never consider. The story of what people ate in the Middle Ages is really the story of how they lived, who held power, who served them, and who went without.
For a peasant, a typical day began before dawn with that ale and a thick slice of dark bread.
The bread was nothing like what we know today. It was coarse, heavy, and made from rye or barley rather than wheat. Wheat was expensive and mostly reserved for the wealthy.
Peasant bread was dense enough to function as a tool. A thick, stale slice placed beneath a meal acted as a plate, soaking up every drop of liquid before being eaten at the end or tossed to the dogs. These edible plates were called trenchers. They were used across Europe for centuries.
The centerpiece of the peasant meal, eaten at midday and often again at night, was pottage.
Pottage was a thick stew made from whatever was available.
Grains, beans, lentils, leeks, onions, peas, and sometimes scraps of dried meat or salted fish. It simmered over an open fire for hours and filled the home with warmth. It was not glamorous, but it was nourishing, and a skilled cook could vary it enough that no two bashes tasted exactly alike. Protein for peasants came in modest forms. Cheese was common, made from the milk of their own animals. Eggs from backyard chickens were eaten when available. River fish could be caught, but fishing the Lord's waters without permission carried a heavy fine. Wild game, including rabbits and deer, were reserved by law for the nobility, and poaching was punishable by mutilation. The line between what a peasant could legally eat and what the nobility ate was not just a matter of taste, it was enforced. A noble's table told an entirely different story. A great feast in a medieval hall was an event of theater as much as food. Entire roasted animals arrived carried by servants. Boar, venison, peacock, sometimes restuffed into its own feathers after roasting, so that it appeared alive at the table.
Swan was considered a delicacy of the highest order, reserved for the most prestigious tables in the kingdom.
The food of the wealthy was not simply more food, it was different food. And the thing that separated it most sharply from peasant cooking was spice. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, and saffron were not merely flavor additions, they were currency. In the early Middle Ages, a small pouch of pepper was worth more than most peasants earned in a month. Spices arrived from the east through long and dangerous trade routes, and the merchant who controlled their supply controlled enormous wealth. Wealthy cooks used spices with a deliberate excess that was meant to signal power. A dish that tasted of 5 imported spices told every guest at the table exactly how much the host was worth. Sugar was part of that display, but not in the way we might imagine. Sugar in medieval Europe was classified as a spice, not a food. It arrived from the Middle East at enormous expense and was used in tiny amounts to flavor savory dishes, season wine, and create elaborate confections. A sugar sculpture placed at the center of a noble table, shaped like a castle or an animal, was one of the most expensive things that could be served. It was meant to be admired, not necessarily eaten. The ordinary sweetener for everyone, from peasant to king, was honey. Medieval kitchens used it to bake, to brew mead, to preserve fruit, and to treat wounds. Bees were kept in nearly every village. Honey was the sugar of the medieval world, and it appeared in everything from bread to medicine. The church held enormous influence over what people ate and when. In medieval Catholic Europe, approximately 150 days of the year were designated as fasting days. On those days, eating meat was forbidden. No beef, no pork, no poultry, no game. The restriction applied to kings and peasants alike, though with very different consequences. For the nobility,
Fasting days meant a feast of elaborate fish dishes, sturgeon, salmon, eel, and lamprey, prepared with the same spices and sauces normally used for meat. For peasants, it meant dried herring or salted cod, if they were fortunate enough to have any. The church's hold on the food calendar shaped fishing industries, trade routes, salt production, and entire regional economies. Lent alone, 40 days without meat, drove demand for preserved fish across all of Northern Europe and created commercial networks that lasted for centuries. Salt was as valuable as spice. Without refrigeration, preserving food through winter required enormous quantities of salt. Meat was salted, fish was packed in salt, vegetables were pickled in brine. A household that ran out of salt in autumn faced genuine danger before the spring thaw. Salt taxes were among the most despised levies of the medieval period, and entire rebellions were triggered by a government's decision to raise its price.
The kitchens themselves were remarkable spaces. A noble castle kitchen was a complex operation with multiple hearths, specialized cooks for different courses, and a head cook who held real authority over the household staff. Preparation for a great feast began days in advance. Spices were ground, pastries were shaped, sauces were reduced, and roasting pits were built. In a peasant home, the kitchen was simply the main room. The fire burned in the center or against one wall, with a hanging pot above it. Smoke filled the room and rose through a hole in the roof. Cooking was done daily, with whatever was available from the garden, the forest, or the market. What did medieval food actually taste like? The popular image of medieval food as bland and monotonous is not entirely accurate, at least not for those with money. Noble recipes that survive in manuscripts describe dishes layered with flavor. Roasted meat glazed with honey and ginger, fish baked in almond milk and spiced wine, a sauce called cameline built from cinnamon, ginger, cloves, vinegar, and toasted bread. These are not dull flavors. They are complex and deliberately constructed. Peasant food, by contrast, tasted of the season. In autumn, it was richer. Fresh vegetables, new cheese, freshly brewed ale. By February, the stores were running low and the pottage was thinner and quieter. The rhythm of the medieval year was written in what people could afford to eat. Was medieval food inferior to what we eat today? A noble eating spiced venison beside a fire in a decorated hall was eating extraordinarily well by any standard. A peasant eating rye bread and cold pottage in a smoky hut in February was surviving, week by week, hoping the winter would break before the stores ran out. The gap between those two experiences was one of the defining features of medieval life. Food made that gap visible every single day, on the plate, on the table, and in the law. Today, much